Terror strikes the U.S. from within. 2 massacres in less than 24 hours leave dozens dead. Democrats blame Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric. We ask if there's any truth to that. I'm Imran Garda, and today on The Newsmakers, we turn the spotlight once again on America's mass shootings. The United States is in mourning after back-to-back mass shootings have shaken the country, with more than 30 people killed in the space of just 13 hours. On Saturday, a gunman opened fire at a Walmart in the city of El Paso. A 21-year-old white man was arrested at the scene. He's believed to have posted a statement online saying the attack was a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas. It's being investigated as a case of domestic terrorism. Within hours, another gunman opened fire in Ohio, killing 9 people, including his sister. The president initially linked both attacks to issues of mental health, but Democrats leapt to blame Trump's own language about immigrants, as well as his opposition to gun control. In a televised address, Trump did condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. But that hasn't stopped his critics from claiming his words have already done damage. Natalie Perhernan has more.
El Paso, Texas and Dayton, Ohio are the newest additions to a list no one wants to be on. They're the sites of mass shootings. At least 31 people were killed in less than 24 hours in the 2 separate attacks.
Yesterday, evil entered El Paso in the form of a 21-year-old, hate-filled young man.
The language used by officials in both places follows a now familiar script.
We started receiving 911 calls from the public of an active shooter. Initial reports of the weapon was a rifle.
The suspect was wearing body armor and used an AK-like gun, assault rifle, .223 caliber with high-capacity magazines, and he had additional magazines with him as well.
The guns used in both attacks were bought legally. The attacker in Dayton was killed by police. They haven't established a motive yet. Authorities in Texas have charged the suspected gunman in El Paso with murder. Federal prosecutors are treating it as a case of domestic terrorism. The weekend of carnage has once again led to questions on gun control and how to prevent this from happening again. Something communities across the US have been asking over and over. Dayton and El Paso have now joined them in that growing chorus.
The shooter in El Paso posted a manifesto online consumed by racist hate. In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. Hatred warps the mind, ravages the heart, and devours the soul.
Authorities have linked an anti-immigrant manifesto posted online before the El Paso shooting to the alleged gunman, citing it as evidence the massacre was racially motivated. El Paso is a city on Mexico's border with a predominantly Latino population. The shooting is being investigated as a hate crime. Critics of President Donald Trump say his anti-immigrant rhetoric has worsened divisions and created an environment for white supremacism to grow. The language of his speech in response to the shootings is a distinct change in tone for the president. Here's Trump, both as candidate and commander-in-chief, talking about the people crossing the US-Mexico border.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. But how do you stop these people? You can't. There's no... That's only in the panhandle you can get away with that statement.
the Panhandle.
El Paso is Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke's hometown. He says the president has invited violence.
Someone who has constantly and consistently and vocally sought to make this country afraid of immigrants, using the most racist, dehumanizing language, describing them as animals, as an infestation. Now, an infestation is what you would describe cockroaches in your home or termites or something less than human. You wouldn't talk about human beings that way.
President Trump is due to visit El Paso this week. When he does, he'll find a community uniting in its diversity, not divided by it. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Washington by attorney Qasim Rashid. He's a Democratic candidate for the Virginia State Senate. In Houston, Texas, we have former Republican congressional candidate and Marine Corps combat veteran Jesse Kelly. He also hosts his own conservative radio show. And in Columbus, Ohio, is Joseph Parrott. He's an assistant history professor at the Ohio State University, specializing in American politics. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Qasim Rashid, multiple atrocities, once again, innocents being massacred by young men with guns. Is the president a part of the problem?
Well, I think the facts speak for themselves. When you have a president who has used rhetoric calling migrants invaders, and using words on people of color like infestation, echoing the horrific verbiage used by Nazi Germany. When you have him telling people, women of color, to go back, notwithstanding that they're all U.S. citizens. When you have him laughing at rallies when someone says to shoot migrants, and then someone acts on those so-called jokes, I think there's absolutely clear lines of correspondence between what the president is joking about or allowing and how extremists are acting. We just saw Caesar, I can't remember his full name, Caesar Sayak, I think, the guy in Florida who sent bombs to numerous Democratic candidates and commentators, saying that he was radicalized by the president, by the rhetoric out of Fox News. So, you know, words have meanings, words have consequences. And when someone with the power and authority of the president tries to utilize those words for destructive purposes, and then people act on them, you can't just wash your hands clean and say, you know, let's blame video games. Right. There needs to be accountability and some responsibility taken to stop these kinds of atrocities.
So when the president says, Qasim, we, in one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy, you think that's just his speechwriter, that's not him being sincere at all?
Well, again, you know, you have 4 years of rhetoric against people of color, against Muslims, against migrants, against women of color, against Mexicans, using the most horrific language, calling them rapists, calling them criminals, you know, disparaging countries of Africa. And then you have one sentence after people are killed, now calling for unity and against racism. I think it's lip service. Let's have some action. Let's reinvest in stopping white supremacy terrorism. The fact that the president defunded attempts by the government to neutralize and stop white supremacist groups is more telling. The fact that he took money away from anti-radicalization groups is more telling. So words are a start, but they're not nearly enough to undo the damage that's already been done.
Jesse Kelly, is there anything that Qasim said that you agree with?
No, actually there wasn't. And it's not that I have anything against him, but look, I choose to only hold the mass shooter accountable, the mass murderer accountable. I don't choose to hold politicians accountable. I mean, that killer in Dayton, I won't name him because I don't believe in naming them, was a huge leftist, was a huge Elizabeth Warren fan. That horrible monster in El Paso was a big fan of universal health care and was worried about the environment. These guys are complicated, insane, crazy people. I don't hold politicians accountable for such things, and nor do I think Democrats want to go down that road of holding people accountable for who they're fans of, especially when we have a Democrat Party that accuses ICE of being like concentration camp guards. They use rhetoric like our detention facilities for illegal immigrants are like Auschwitz and things like that. Those are insane things to say. I disagree with them. But when somebody acts on that, when some nut job acts on that, I don't hold them accountable.
There has been a change here. And it's unfortunate, I hate to say this, but I've covered this story for so long, I've been able to witness the changes here. When you have someone like Ted Cruz even name white supremacy. You have the president even name white supremacy. That's a new thing, right? The fact that they're even calling it domestic terrorism, that's a new thing. The New York Post, which is ostensibly right-wing, coming out with a major editorial saying it's time to ban weapons of war. That's a new thing. In Ohio, the Republican governor saying we need expanded background checks. It tells me that they're all waking up to the idea that this is more than just the gunman himself being responsible for his atrocity. There's something deeper wrong, and we need to face up to it. It's not the Democrats saying this. So, Jesse, something's afoot here. Something's changing, right?
Yes, something bad is changing. Everything you just mentioned, those people are wrong. I don't care that they have Republican by their name. I don't care that the New York Post is thought to be a right-wing place, a right-wing publication. Those people are dead wrong. The worst thing you can do after a mass shooting or any kind of horrible tragedy is any legislation at all, whether that be right-wing, left-wing, whatever it is. Give people a chance to calm down, let emotions calm down, and approach things from a reasonable manner. And reducing people's gun rights is the last thing in the world we need to do right now. I just saw a video this morning. One of the survivors from El Paso was laying there in a hospital bed saying, I wish my grandmother was there with her 38. When you have a mass murderer, a psychopath trying to kill as many people as possible, what you're thinking in that moment is not more gun laws. You're thinking, I wish I had a gun. We need to expand gun rights, not reduce gun rights.
Okay. Joseph Parrott, so I'm going to put aside the video games thing because the data shows there's absolutely no causation or correlation. I mean, when I was a kid, they said that young people listening to Marilyn Manson and playing video games would become violent, right? I mean, that stuff just has no basis, right? But what we've heard is, okay, guns, mental health, white supremacist ideology, the president creating an anti-immigrant tone. Out of all those things, is it one of them? Is it a combination of them? What's behind what we're seeing and the spate of atrocities that we've seen innocent Americans having to experience?
Well, I mean, I think honestly, and I'm not an expert on gun legislation here, on these gun atrocities, but I think we can see that there are a lot of issues that are going on, and not every gunman has the same motivations. But one of the reasons why this conversation is changing is because in the last few years, we have seen a rise of gun violence coming from white supremacists and coming from some of these people who are holding these kind of invasion type rhetoric ideas and that we need to defend against this. And I think what's important here is that these are fringe people, these are fringe groups, but they don't want to be on the fringe. They want to be in the center of this conversation. And so some of these attacks, like if you look at reports coming out of El Paso, they want to incite this larger movement. And so one of the things that they're actually looking for is legitimacy. And so I don't think the president is trying to incite violence. I don't think he believes he is inciting violence. One of the things that's happening is when he's using the same rhetoric, when he's using this invasion rhetoric, and when he's backing away from some of his official statements like he did in Charlottesville, saying they're good people on both sides. This is what some of these white supremacists want, right? They want that legitimacy. They want this mainstream talking point that they can say, hey, we're not on the fringe. We're at the vanguard of this movement. And I think that's what's troubling people. That's what's troubling folks in the Republican Party. That's what's troubling folks in the Democratic Party. And that's what's troubling people in general, right? We're worried about what this rhetoric is doing to legitimize these ideas.
Qasim Rashid, is it more difficult to have a unified theory of this or an elegant theory of this when you consider, as Jesse Kelly mentioned, that in Dayton, we don't have all the facts, but it seems as if the guy was probably a hard leftist. He was probably an Antifa fan from his Twitter account and so on. So it's a little bit more complicated than just to say that this guy watched Trump and felt inspired and triggered by what Trump said about migrants and went to shoot up people. Dayton seemed to be completely different to what happened in Texas.
Well, again, I think one thing he said that was telling is that he doesn't want to hold politicians accountable, and that's unfortunately the problem here. What we find, and as I'm running for office right now, I'm canvassing with Republicans and Democrats, and one thing we find universally is that Republicans and Democrats want more responsible gun legislation. Nobody in their right mind wants to make it easy for terrorists, domestic abusers, and violent people to get guns. In fact, over 90% of Americans, Republicans and Democrats combined, want to have stronger gun legislation to ensure that law-abiding citizens can get guns and extremists and terrorists can't. And the fact that the Republicans are still refusing to move an inch on this issue shows how out of touch they are with society. What we need to do is recognize that responsible gun legislation doesn't hinder freedom. It doesn't create more danger. It doesn't create a lack of access. It actually enhances those things. And the evidence of that is every developed country in the world, whether it's our neighbor Canada, whether it's the United Kingdom, whether it's Germany, whether it's Japan. Every developed country in the world has responsible gun legislation, and they rank higher than America on safety. They rank higher than America on peace. They rank higher than America on human freedom. So this is not some theory, some cockamamie idea that the only way to stop a bad guy with the gun is a good guy with the gun. It's nonsense. What we saw in Dayton, for example, this individual, this terrorist, was taken down within 30 seconds. And despite that, he killed 9 of our fellow neighbors and injured over 20 more. Less than 30 seconds is all the time he needed to destroy 9 lives and all the hundreds of people that knew them. So I'm running this campaign for state senate on principles, on facts, not on theories.
Okay.
And the facts tell us that Republicans and Democrats alike want responsible gun legislation, and the world has shown us that responsible gun legislation makes us safer, makes it easier to access for responsible law-abiding citizens, and makes it more difficult for terrorists and extremists to access guns. That shouldn't be controversial.
So Jesse Kelly, what Qasim's basically saying is that you have such a religious devotion to the Second Amendment that you're willing to stick to that even at the expense of kids' lives because gun rights come first.
Well, I don't care if that's what he's saying. He's wrong. And look, we can cite all these examples of other countries. Let's cite examples within our own country. How are things in Baltimore these days? How are things in Chicago these days? These are cities with some of the strictest gun laws in the United States of America, and I believe Baltimore just tallied up their 200th murder this year. The truth of the matter is gun laws don't make anybody safer. A psychopathic killer is going to find a way to get a weapon, whether that be a gun or a car or anything else. They are going to find a way to get a weapon. And it's not a theory that a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. We have example after example of that. And we don't need to bring up other nations and what they're doing because other nations do not have the Second Amendment. We do in the United States of America, and as much as people may hate it, it is the law of the land. And if you don't like it, try to amend the Constitution. Until then, I am allowed to have as many weapons as I want, as much ammunition as I want, and I am allowed to have them for the express purpose of maintaining freedom and defending myself, and I will continue to do so.
Qasim?
So again, this is, we're not working with facts anymore. My parents bought us a hunting rifle when we were young. We've been raised on guns. I understand safe gun usage. My brother is a U.S. Marine veteran. He brags about the fact that he shot expert every year while in the Marine Corps. This is not being anti-Second Amendment. It's being pro-value of human life. I grew up in Chicago. People keep bringing up Chicago, ignoring the fact that it's actually only the 16th most violent city in America, and the most violent ones are, in fact, like Louisiana and New Orleans, because they have 0 gun laws. And the only reason you have gun violence so high in Chicago is because right next door in Indiana, they have absolutely no gun legislation whatsoever. So people go 5 miles, cross the border, and bring the guns back in. What we need to do is look at the facts and not have this blind devotion to something that is contrary to human values. And the facts tell us that responsible gun legislation that prevents extremists or makes it more difficult for terrorists to get guns actually works. The states in America right now that have responsible gun legislation have lower gun deaths, have higher rates of safety, as opposed to those who have 0 gun legislation have higher gun deaths and lower rates of safety. So by all means, have your guns, protect yourself, but let's stop extremists and terrorists from getting guns. That is what we're talking about. Not law-abiding citizens. We're talking about preventing terrorists from getting guns. Why is that controversial for you?
Okay, I want to go to Joseph Parrott here. And once again, big picture. Let's go to the history professor here. When we look back at 2019 and we analyze this culture war that the United States is in right now, how will we look at this era and the debate over the aftermath of atrocities, whether in a school or at a Walmart?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's one that we won't be able to deal with for a little while because I think we are maybe at a turning point. But this is one of the things, actually, this rhetoric of sentimentalists, of hysteria, of these emotional reformers. This isn't new. This is actually a problem that we've been dealing with since the 1920s. And it was gun lobbyists. There's a historian named Pamela Hague who's written about this. It was gun lobbyists, gun industry representatives who were trying to dismiss reformers as essentially hysterical and emotional. And this was a conversation we were having 100 years ago. And I think one of the things that's important about this, one of the things that's important about the emotions of this moment is it's mobilizing people to act, to break out of this lethargy where we feel like we can't do anything, where this is just the way the United States is. And we've seen in other places around the country, Australia, which did not have the Second Amendment, Mr. Kelly's absolutely right, but did have, among other things, this gun culture, this settler culture. After the Port Arthur massacre of, I believe, 1995 or 1996, there was change because they were led by individuals who were willing to make a change, politicians who were willing to make a change. And if we have individuals like Mike DeWine in Ohio who is willing to kind of embrace some of these changes, if we have a few people from both parties who are willing to come together around common sense gun laws, maybe there's something that can actually happen. But we need to actually move away from, I think, this emotionalism of attachment to gun rights and actually talk about the facts that are going around this. Because one of the things that we've seen is we can't even do studies on guns or gun-related deaths in the United States because the NRA and other lobbying groups prevent the federal government from investing in that. So it's clear that this emotional attachment is really more on the side of guns than it is on the side of gun regulation for most of the conversation.
So, Jesse Kelly, would you agree at the very least that something needs to be done? So this past weekend, a young couple in their early 20s, broke the bones of their 2-month-old baby in trying to protect it while they were shot dead from a random mass shooter who came out of nowhere when they were just on a morning out, right? You accept that that's not normal, that's not right, something needs to be done?
I don't know anybody in the world that thinks that that's okay. It's horrific. As a parent of 2 kids, it's absolutely horrible. But yes, something needs to be done. What needs to be done is people need to go down to their local gun store and gun range, familiarize themselves with weapons, go to a range, make sure you learn how to use a weapon safely, make sure you are fast and deadly with it, and make sure you carry it everywhere, because the truth of the matter is all these pontificating politicians, Democrats, Republicans, whatever it may be, they will not be there to save you when the next psychopath walks into a Walmart with a weapon. You will have to save yourself. You're either going to be prepared to do so or you're going to be a sheep.
Okay, final comment to Qasim Rashid in less than 30 seconds, please, because I got to wrap.
I would simply say this, that when we talk about gun legislation, we're not talking about taking guns away from law-abiding citizens. We're talking about preventing extremists and terrorists from getting guns. Part of the responsibility of why we elect public servants is to pass legislation that protects us. They are failing at that right now. Republicans and Democrats alike want responsible gun legislation. It's time politicians acted. And if they're not going to act to change laws, it's time to change politicians and elect responsible people willing to serve the people, not the NRA or the gun lobby.
Okay. It feels like Groundhog Day because we keep on having this discussion after every one of these terrible atrocities. Qasim Rashid, Jesse Kelly, and Joseph Parrott, I've got to move on, but I thank you very much for joining us. If people in Kashmir felt they had very little autonomy, well, things just got a whole lot worse. The Indian government has revoked part of the constitution that gave Indian-administered Kashmir a special status. A presidential decree abolished the law that gave the territory some freedoms, including the right to its own constitution, a small degree of autonomy, and the hope of self-determination. The ruling BJP has argued these privileges prevented the region's development and its integration with India. The move followed a huge security clampdown, with New Delhi having deployed tens of thousands of soldiers to the region in recent days. Local politicians have been placed under house arrest, and very little news is making it out. So, will scrapping the decades-old law prompt more turmoil in the disputed region? And could it pave the way for Kashmir's complete annexation? Adam Pletz explains.
India-administered Kashmir is under immediate blackout. New Delhi has cut the internet and mobile networks. Public gatherings are banned, a curfew is in place, and thousands of extra soldiers have been deployed. This, as the Indian Interior Minister announced the revocation of Kashmir's semi-autonomous status on Monday.
I have come with a firm resolution in my mind that there shouldn't be a second's delay in the abrogation of Article 370.
Opposition parties have condemned the decision and question its legality.
The BJP has murdered the constitution and democracy today.
Article 370 of the Indian Constitution conferred special status on Kashmir, including the right to make its own laws, except in foreign defense and communications matters. It also states that only Kashmiri residents can buy property within the state. But one of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's central campaign promises was to end Kashmir's autonomy. Critics say the intention is to change the demographic balance of India's only majority Muslim state, and BJP supporters are celebrating.
We congratulate Narendra Modi and Amit Shah. Our 30 years of banishment has ended. The most important thing is that now Jammu and Kashmir will prosper. Today is the actual independence.
Since the end of the British Raj in 1947, India and Pakistan have fought 3 wars over Kashmir, the first of which resulted in its partition. Fully integrating India-administered Kashmir into the rest of the country may play to Modi's populist politics, but is also highly divisive at home and abroad. Indian opposition politicians have promised to fight Article 370's revocation, fearing its implication for other minority groups. In Kashmir, it threatens to cause civil unrest and embolden armed militants. It could even risk another conflict with Pakistan. And Kashmiri politicians, many now under house arrest, have warned of difficult times ahead.
Today marks the darkest day in Indian democracy. It will have catastrophic consequences for the subcontinent. The government of India's intentions are clear. They want the territory of Jammu and Kashmir by terrorising its people. India has failed Kashmir in keeping its promises.
In failing to keep one promise, the BJP has kept another, namely its election pledge to end Kashmiri autonomy. But has it done so at any cost, even if that cost is another conflict? Adam Pletz, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in London is Kashmiri journalist and novelist Mirza Waheed. He's the author of several novels set in his native Kashmir, including The Collaborator and The Book of Gold Leaves. Good to have you on the program, Mirza Waheed. So, Kashmir stripped of its special status. What does that mean to you as a Kashmiri?
I mean, it means many things. We are still trying to make sense of it. But what we do know so far is they've done in the parliament, in India's parliament, in the highest seat of democracy in India. They have done exactly what they've done in Kashmir on the ground in the last 30 years, which is a brutal denial of rights, a complete shutdown of people's agency. As we now know, they made this decision within a couple of hours in the Indian parliament while putting an entire people in a most brutal seat. Most people, and almost entirely, the entire population of Kashmir right now is locked down. There is no communications, as you might well know. I haven't been able to speak to my parents for more than 2 days now. I don't know how they are. I don't know anything about them or other families. They can't even talk to each other because this time around, the crackdown, the lockdown is so brutal that they have even blocked good old-fashioned landline. So there's no word out of Kashmir, as our famous Kashmiri poet Agha Shahid Ali said, from where no news can come. That's one. The other aspect is, what does it mean? It means all the dark things that Kashmiris suspected for a long, long time, that this is the BJP's, it was part of their campaign promise that they're going to abrogate this article. This article had been eroded away anyway over the last few decades. It was token autonomy anyway. But within the constitutional framework of India, it guaranteed a special status, which was the main condition of Kashmir's accession to India in 1947, when the then King Maharaja Hari Singh agreed to accede to the Indian Union under spurious sort of circumstances. suspicious circumstances, but that's another matter. In promise for when they agreed, India promised to retain Kashmir's autonomy with defense, foreign affairs, and communications would be looked after by India, and the rest of the state would be looked after by the local government. That's been eroded successfully by the Indian state, by its client elites within Kashmir, by direct promulgations from Delhi. From time to time, we always had president's rule, which basically means a man from Delhi is imposed as a direct ruler in Kashmir, as we saw just now. And now it's very clear they had this governor in place who's a BJP man for this dramatic, shocking move.
Right. I mean, I'd like to ask you if you believe that the message to Kashmiris is that, listen, there's no longer any dispute, there's no longer any argument, there's no longer any hope for more autonomy or even the little autonomy that you did have, never mind self-determination. I wonder if you think the message is that Kashmir is wholly India's, and for as long as the BJP is in power, they're going to make sure that that happens.
This is their stated position. But you see, the thing is, just because they have this mandate and they can pass this law, it was a sleight of hand how they got this approved. Because as I said, I want to go back to my earlier point. In order to revoke Article 370, you need what the correct word is concurrence. You need concurrence from the state constituent assembly, which doesn't exist. There's one man who rules Kashmir right now, who is a governor appointed by the same party that made this, abrogated the article yesterday. The message is very clear. You're absolutely right. The message is unambiguous, which is we will do what we please to do with. You have no voice. We will shut you down. We'll lock your phones. We'll lock you inside your houses. And we will annex Kashmir. That's what they are trying to do. But the question is, how will it pan out on the ground? And that worries me a lot, because Kashmiris, as we know, history is witness to the fact, have always resisted moves by the Indian state to change the status of Jammu and Kashmir status. And I'm really, really worried, because once this blockade is lifted, once the curfew is gone, we might see unprecedented turmoil in the state once again, which, as we all know, means more bloodshed.
Yeah, a lot of people are very worried. Mirza Waheed, really good to talk to you. Looking forward to chatting to you again on the show sometime soon. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Let's broaden out the discussion. Joining me now from New Delhi is Syed Zafar Islam. He's the national spokesman for India's ruling BJP. Also in New Delhi is journalist Ajay Shukla. He's a retired Indian Army colonel. And in London is Muzammil Ayub Thakur. He's the president of the World Kashmir Freedom Movement and the executive director of the Justice Foundation. Gentlemen, good to have you on the Newsmakers. Syed Zafar Islam, we heard from Mirza Waheed, who said that this revoking of the article means all the dark things that Kashmiris have suspected over all these years. Is he wrong?
Absolutely, absolutely wrong. Let me tell you and your viewer that the ordinary Kashmiris, unlike Mr. Waheed, they were always keen and wanted that this Article 370 and 35A should be scrapped, because whatever benefits, who were enjoying those benefits under Article 370 or 35A, it's only the few privileged families, that's all. The ordinary Kashmiris were certainly suffering, and because all the benefits were only going to these people, and they were insulated from the the advantages these people had from the Union of India. So the ordinary Kashmiris are extremely excited, extremely happy. They're thrilled with joy, and I'm sure once the opportunity they will have, they will definitely demonstrate the keenness.
I haven't been able to hear from them as to whether they're happy or not, because there's a blackout and a lockdown by the Indian Army, so we can't hear from a single Kashmiri right now. So listen, this will live forever on the internet. We'll circle back to your words once we hear from Kashmiris in the valley, once the lockdown and blackout ends. Muzammil Ayub Thakur, are you one of those elitists who's not an ordinary Kashmiri because you oppose revoking Article 370?
According to the definition of your previous guest, it seems that anybody that disagrees with them is an elitist. Unfortunately, these people are delusional. They live in La La Land, and they have never probably lived inside Kashmir and integrated or assimilated with those people, understood what they felt over the last 70 odd years. If we leave the last 70 years and we just look at since 2008, the uprising that started in 2008 against Indian oppression and Indian subjugation has continued. It's manifested into something even worse, into something even more. It has forced the hand of India to take unconstitutional decisions, break its own laws, and most importantly, the United Nations resolutions of 122, 123, and 126, where there can be no changes to the situation of Kashmir, of how it is at the moment, until the plebiscite or the referendum happens. So he's completely in the wrong. He has no idea. Sitting in Delhi, he can't tell the Kashmiris how to feel. And most importantly, when they've locked everything down, they won't allow any movement of traffic. They won't allow any information to flow through Kashmir or outside of Kashmir. How on earth does he have the right to discuss how we feel and what our opinions are?
Ajay Shukla, stripping Kashmir of its autonomy at this moment in time, was it a good idea?
Oh, well, I don't know whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. Opinion is sharply divided on that. I think it was a bad idea. But it has to be seen in the larger context of things. Anybody who says that they suspected dark deeds or dark intentions on the part of New Delhi has not been reading the BJP's manifestos and the BJP's stated positions over the years, going all the way back to the early 1950s. The Bharatiya Janata Party, which is now in power, has consistently stated, including in its two manifestos of 2014 and 2019, earlier this year, that it would revoke Article 370 because it believes that it's an outdated provision. It's a provision that existed at a point in time in history when India was forming its borders, when India was consolidating its territory, and at that point, article, those set of provisions are outdated and need to be done away with. This also consolidates with the BJP's majoritarian position of a Hindu homeland for India. And it believes that the days of pandering to minorities, including the Muslim minority, are long past, and that doesn't need to be done any longer.
Right.
So this is not surprising. This is something that was on the cards.
Okay, and I want to bring in Syed Zafar Islam here for some clarity here, because what's interesting is that as we've discussed this over the past couple of years or so, Article 35A was expected to be revoked, which was a part of 370, but this government went and revoked the whole thing. Is it true that the intention is to have an element of finality here from this government? It's saying that Kashmir is no longer in dispute. There's no negotiations over self-determination. The people in the valley who want the opportunity to have a plebiscite or referendum, they can get lost, and never mind Pakistan. There's no more debate about Kashmir because the deed is done and it's settled. Is that what you want?
Well, I'm sure that you have read Article 370, and the first thing everyone should know that it was temporary. Is 70 years, is it temporary? I think it should have gone long back. Unfortunately, the elitist Kashmiris feel that it was their right to have Article 370 while ignoring the livelihood of the ordinary Kashmiris and the prosperity which they will have now, something which has been denied to them in the past. Let me tell you, there are few people in Kashmir will definitely have problems, but the majority of Kashmir, we know the pulse, unlike the elitist Kashmiri sitting on this channel, where definitely they are privileged. I must say they are privileged because most of the Kashmiris were talking about fighting their battle is the one their children are studying in overseas.
Allow me to come in here for a second.
How dare you?
If this is
How
something
dare
that's
you?
so, say, if this is something so fundamentally good for the people in the valley, it's interesting that it's being enforced at the moment at the barrel of a gun with thousands of troops that have rolled in and they've been cut off from the rest of the world. Doesn't sound like the most wonderful thing that's being gifted to them right now, does it?
Well, let me give you the reason why it is being done. First of all, because these ordinary Kashmiris have been used like a bullet. Every time by these elitist Kashmiris and the few families who are the beneficiary all along of our Article 370. So they have been always misled. The ordinary Kashmiris will be again used by these people for protest, and they will be the one who will be the victim, not these people. To ensure that doesn't happen, we have ensured that the adequate security measures are there, and once everything gets normalized, the same Kashmiri people, ordinary Kashmiri people, will
before I get a
respond to these
response
people,
from Muzammil,
the elitist Kashmiris,
okay, certainly. Before I get a response from
their
Muzammil,
rights have
certainly.
been restored, which has been denied to them.
Certainly. Before I get a response from Muzammil, I have a very specific question to you, because you talk a lot about the ordinary Kashmiris who you say are in the majority. Could you name me one of them currently in the valley that supports the government's policy now in revoking Article 370? Could you name me one person?
Well, you would not know all the ordinary Kashmiris. You will unfortunately know only the elected.
No, I'd like one
let
name.
me tell you.
And then we'll follow up. Give us a name and we'll follow up. Give us one person's name and we'll follow up. Okay, so just one. Just one.
No, allow me to complete. Sure. All I'm saying, ask all the ministers who are there right now, the ministers who are there in Kashmir from the valley side, ask their own team. They will say that this should have gone back, and I can't say.
Omar Abdullah is detained at the moment. Okay, but if you could just give me the name of one ordinary Kashmiri who supports this policy, just one.
I'm hinting you.
No, I want a name. One person.
No, why will I give the name? But I'm telling you all the ministers and the ex-chief ministers of Jammu and Kashmir and their team. Ask their team. They will say the wonderful thing has happened.
One
and
name.
These people should put
one name, sir. One name of someone who supports this policy.
I can't name anyone.
Muzammil Ayub Thakur, come in.
You will realize
okay,
these people
Muzammil,
will have a difficult time going forward.
Muzammil?
Well, you've witnessed yourself exactly what the BJP spokesman is talking about. He's talking complete nonsense. He has no idea what he's saying. They're living in a fool's paradise. I don't understand why they can't accept the fact that nobody in Kashmir, it doesn't matter whether it's their own lackeys like the former chief ministers who were puppets to the Indian government, and look how they've treated them. Do you really think that anybody in Kashmir right now has any affinity to the states of India, to even the BJP? The moment the lines of communication are opened up, of which Amit Shah has already said that they have no intention of removing the new forces or opening up communications, but once that happens, you will see yourself exactly what's going on. May I also point out that this isn't the first time. Historically, India have time and again used cyber cells to silence people that are dissenting, not just people on the streets, but even on the internet, be it Facebook, social media, Twitter, whatever it is. And they continuously try and silence them. Now, when they talk about people that are elitists, I mean, you cannot translate that every single person, 99.9% of people that are in Kashmir at the moment, and those that are in the diaspora, are completely against what is going on. There is a massive campaign at the moment working against what has happened in terms of the application of Article 370. But
you are far away from the reality. You don't know the reality. Let me tell you one thing, Mr. Muzammil.
No. You have no right to say anything in regards to Kashmir. You are sitting in Delhi. You don't have any Kashmiri blood. You have no communication with anybody in Kashmir. All you've done is assaulted, murdered, killed people under the pretense of some kind of secular India. You have a Rashtriya. You have a simple system of alienating people, killing people, murdering people. Your government has the minority. What they've done with the minorities. Your own prime minister has murdered, is considered to be the butcher of Gujarat. On what moral authority do you think that you have sitting here and telling a Kashmiri how to feel and what he thinks and what the reality on the ground is? No, sir, you have no right to speak. No, sir, you have no right to tell me how to feel. You have no right to tell me what the facts are. I will tell you what the truth is. I will tell you what the facts are.
He will give them prosperity.
This is not your Indian news channel that you can shout and scream at me. You're supposed to be the head of a democracy.
Okay. So Sayyid Zafar Islam is saying that you'll bring development and jobs. I want to talk a little bit about something more imminently feared and ask Ajay Shukla, especially given your previous experience as an Indian Army colonel. Is there an expectation from your end that the insurgency will be ignited by this movement, by the government to revoke Article 370, and we're going to see trouble around the corner?
Yes. Sadly, I have to say yes, that is the case. I think that the insurgency has moved in cycles, and now we are at a point in time where this measure that has been taken is likely to rekindle insurgency. It's likely to enhance the levels of violence, the levels of alienation. And yes, I have to say that I have to endorse the position that there is probably not one Kashmiri in the whole valley who will welcome the revocation of Article 370, including the former chief ministers who have gone on record to criticize it. But I have to also say that looking at it dispassionately as a journalist, as a person who looks at the big picture, the Kashmiris have about as much chance of getting independence or freedom as the Kurds do in your own country. I think that the borders have been drawn, the lines have been drawn. These are cycles of violence that will rise and fall, and the government is prepared to take the hard steps. It supports the government's position, a majoritarian position of putting the Muslims in their place. And to that extent, I don't think that there's going to be too much success to this cycle of violence rising. There will just be more people killed, more Kashmiris killed. But at the end of the day, the might of a nation, that too a nation like India, is too much to fight against. And this is something that will go in vain, as has the lives of many Kashmiris over the years.
Okay, I'm going to get Muzammil's response, but first, Syed Zafar Islam, come in and then Muzammil can respond. Syed Zafar Islam.
See, I heard Mr. Muzammil said that we live in fool's paradise. Let me assure him, the elitist Kashmiri, that we will create paradise, another paradise in Kashmir, and prove you that you people are fools. Because you people misleading these people, and I must tell you that Bharatiya Janata Party have won the confidence of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and whenever the election will happen, this time Bharatiya Janata Party will win, and these people will have absolutely no say, because see, you have to understand the dynamic because today these people were under the clutches of the elitists, and now they will enjoy 5th of August as their Independence Day. Besides 15th August as the independence of India, but for Jammu and Kashmir, the 5th August will be another Independence Day, because they will get freedom from the elitists and few families who are actually ruining their life and using them as their shield, and using them for protest, using them for everything but for the constructive work. So I think people of the government of India will ensure within 3-4 years, the best state in India will be Jammu and Kashmir. That is something, is the stated position of the Honorable Home Minister on the floor of the Parliament, that all the investment will flow in that state, which has never been happened. All the job creation will happen in that state, and ordinary Kashmiris will be the biggest beneficiary, but unlike these people who will always, for their own benefit, compromise their interests and safeguard their own interests.
Muzammil,
we will not let it happen.
Thakur, come in.
Well, I've been thoroughly entertained by the comedians that we've had on this show today. The reality is, yet again, these people do not know what Kashmiris want. They've never interacted with Kashmiris. They have enforced their own ideas onto us, and they are unwilling to actually listen. Please silence yourself. I didn't interrupt you when you spoke. The reality is, they have, again, please silence yourself. The reality is that they have locked up all forms of dissent. They've imposed this idea on us. It is against their own constitution. Now, I mean, let alone what Kashmiris want. It is against their own constitution. It is against the United Nations resolutions. It is an illegal manifestation of what has happened in the last couple of days. Now, if we even put that to the side, the governor himself didn't know what was going on when he was giving a so-called brief, to the former chief ministers. When the former chief ministers Farooq Abdullah and Umar Abdullah went to visit Narendra Modi, he didn't tell them anything either. So this was something very close under wraps. But I also want to mention this isn't something that has happened suddenly. We've seen this incrementally increase over the last year. First it started with Jamaat Islami and JKLF being banned. Then it was the NIA, the National Investigation Authority, locking people up and doing investigations willy-nilly based on nothing. And then they decided to break up the government between the BJP and PDP. And I mean, this has been incrementally, the BJP and the government have incrementally, thoroughly, systematically planned this to the point where back in February, after the Pulwama attack, Ajit Doval had spoken with his counterpart in America, informing them of what they were going to do. On the 1st of August, yet again, the external minister had also spoken to his counterparts and also the P5 countries. They had informed them in advance on the 1st of August what they were planning on doing. This has not been something that has suddenly happened. It has been ongoing. Right. And the reality is they have never taken any Kashmiri into confidence. And even if they did, they would never have accepted those ideas anyway. Okay. And lastly, if you allow me, Article 370 is not what our issue is. Our issue is the right to self-determination, which has been there since 1947. It is granted to us under the United Nations and the United Nations Charter. Irregardless of what happens, we will continue to fight for our right to self-determination.
Okay, and Indian government. Okay, so listen, Saeed Zafar Islam. Listen. We're completely out of time, but you are all invited back to the show because yes, I want to talk about that because we've had Indian government spokesmen here in the past saying, well, the bilateral talks between Pakistan and India have abrogated that right to self-determination in the UN resolution, and so on. I want to talk about possible demographic changes and Hindus moving into the valley and lots more. At the moment, we're just dying to get some word from the valley and to hear from some Kashmiris, but we can't because the place is under lockdown. But we're keeping a close eye on the situation. Looking forward to talking to you all again very soon. Ajay Shukla, Muzammil Ayub Thakur and Saeed Zafar Islam, thanks for joining us. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Britain joins forces with the US to protect ships in the Gulf. Is this a new coalition of the willing to take on Iran? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.